Okay, hello everyone. First of all, many thanks for the invitation. I think it's a very timely discussion, and it's proof that national parliaments are a very trendy and fashionable topic, not only because of the panelists, but also because of the attendance that we have. I would like to leave a couple of personal disclaimers. The first one is that I woke up at 3 in the morning to be here now, so please bear with me if I say some nonsense. It will be the coffee speaking. Secondly, I am not an academic. I am a civil servant of the Portuguese Parliament. I have spent most of my career in Brussels, so my perspective stems a little bit from that. I will start where Professor Besselink ended, by saying that the biggest challenge is how to mainstream subsidiarity in the overall scrutiny that national parliaments do of EU affairs. Myself, I am not personally an enthusiastic about subsidiarity. Subsidiarity can be many, many things. As you know, national parliaments is a very different concept. You have 41 chambers with 41 different parliamentary systems, and we should always take into account that a homogeneous approach towards national parliaments should be avoided. The Swedish system is very different from the Portuguese one, from the Finnish one even. So all of this has to be factored in when we talk about national parliaments and specifically about subsidiarity. Myself, I don't believe that subsidiarity is the heel against all evil or the thing that brought national parliaments to life. National parliaments existed before subsidiarity, and they will keep on existing. However, it is a very important concept, and it's a very complex one as well. While I was preparing for this conference, I was looking at the Portuguese library in the parliament, and there was an article which for academics is ancient literature because it's from 1994, but it's an article called Subsidiarity, a definition to suit any vision. It's from 1994. I have it here with me. If you want to take copies, I can leave it with the organizers. And I would highlight these three sentences. Firstly, that it is an idea which can suit virtually any political agenda. There is a lack of consensus on what it actually means, and if you read the reasoned opinions already after the Treaty of Lisbon on subsidiarity, there are many, many different grounds to claim that an opinion is a reasoned opinion on subsidiarity. And if you read what the court in Luxembourg has been saying or said about subsidiarity, it's more of a political concept from my point of view as well than a legal doctrine, because it's the understanding that it's up to the European institutions to decide and to make the assessment. On implementing subsidiarity, the reasoning from the European institutions and what has gained more visibility, it's the so-called comparative efficiency test, meaning that a proposal is good to be proposed and to be adopted if it is proved that the aims it envisages are better achieved at EU level than at national level. So that means that it's both necessary and value added. However, there is a difficulty there because it's up to the usual suspects, and don't get me wrong, of the Commission and the institutions to decide what is necessary and value added. And I'm quoting here another article that I found. It's a very recent one from Barbara Guastaferro that refers to, and it's her concept, not mine, the laziness of the Commission in explaining why a certain proposal complies with subsidiarity. It's not my expression, even though if you ask my personal opinion, I would agree. Not only on this, I'll come to that a little bit later. And this author, Barbara Guastaferro, she proposed an interesting concept, which is that she proposes to change a little bit the angle or the frame through which national parliaments carry their subsidiarity analysis to include the dimension of the non-encroachment, meaning that Parliament should also assess to which extent is that proposal intruding into its autonomy. And the case study that everyone has in its mind these days is the European Public Prosecutor Office, that, as you know, was the second yellow card after Monti II. And it's interesting because in many of these fields there is already EU legislation. It is foreseen in the treaty. However, the issues raised by national parliaments were very, very, very different. For instance, there were issues on subsidiarity as such, saying that, like the Dutch, if I remember correctly, said that there is already Europol, Eurojust, the national mechanisms, so there's no need for a centralized structure. There were also concerns about the need of having an EU level, the added value of the proposal, the issues relating to the structure, and this is where the plot thickens, because if you read, for instance, the reasoned opinions of the French Senate and of the Maltese parliaments, they say that the European Public Prosecutor's Office is something good that should exist, but not in the structure that the Commission proposed. And if you read the communication that the Commission issued sometime after the reasoned opinion, the Commission clearly says that this is an issue of proportionality rather than subsidiarity. Nevertheless, for the purpose of Protocol 2, it was considered as a reasoned opinion on subsidiarity grounds. And also the issues relating to the nature and scope of the EPO. With this regard, and coming back to the non-encroachment tests, it is interesting because one of the arguments put forward was the ancillary competence of the EPO, meaning that EPO is supposed to investigate fraud against the financial interests of the EU. However, there's an article in the regulation that says that the prosecutor can also investigate related crimes, for instance, forgery of documents, which are related to the fraud, meaning that it goes beyond the scope of what the treaty foresees, because it deems that it's appropriate for the aim it envisages. And some parliaments, namely the Cypriot, raised this issue. The reply from the Commission, and this is where I will go back to the laziness to some extent. The Commission, in 2009, when the treaty entered into force, President Barroso, together with Commissioner Wallström, I always mix the two, wrote a letter to all speakers of national parliaments saying that the treaty is in force, Protocol 2 is in force, this is how we're going to do. And what that letter foresaw was that whenever there was enough reasoned opinions for the threshold of the yellow card or orange card, the Commission would reply to national parliaments through a communication. When the first yellow cards happened, Monti II, this was not the case. The Commission, as our colleague rightly mentioned, felt that politically there was no margin between the European Parliament and the Council to adopt that proposal, and it was withdrawn. But at that moment, national parliaments were informed that it was withdrawn through a letter from Commissioner Šefčovič to the President of the European Parliament saying that it was going to be withdrawn, and that was it. Then the Commission realized that there was another stakeholder that should be informed, which were national parliaments. And the first reaction was, well, it was withdrawn. Then through COSAC, several parliaments, namely those who adopted reasoned opinions, insisted that the Commission would reply. And then the Commission eventually did. From my point of view, the Commission lost a good chance to cause a first good impression when it really comes into place. Then we come to the second difficult aspect, which is the Commission will, I would empirically anticipate, in all cases decide to maintain the proposal, except in those cases where it deems that the co-legislators would not adopt it. But in EPO, it was interesting because Commissioner Reding was, let's say, quite anxious on the outcome of the national parliament's opinions. There were several bilateral contacts between the Commission and some national parliaments, some national governments during the 8-week procedure. And then when the threshold was met, there was a high expectation on the reply, and the reply from the Commission was, and this was said in a committee meeting in the European Parliament, well, national parliaments used their prerogative during the 8 weeks, but now the procedure will follow with the two co-legislators. So the Commission will now negotiate and deal in trilogue with the two co-legislators. And the Commission then issued another communication, a very lengthy one, which is worth reading, about EPO in particular. But what happens to what national parliaments did? National parliaments then through COSAC, asked the Commission to reply individually to each reasoned opinion, which the Commission then eventually did. But this raises the issue of knowing how do parliaments cope with the 8-week, the threshold met, the reasoned opinions issued, the reply from the Commission, which is, let's say, a little bit falling short of what the national parliaments want. National parliaments will try, from my perspective, to develop more of interparliamentary cooperation, especially through COSAC. And then coming back to what Professor Besselink referred, the challenge is how to mainstream this and to put subsidiarity in its place, because we cannot narrow down the role of national parliaments to an 8-week period in a process that sometimes takes years. It's one step in the process. And my reply is that subsidiarity can be many things, but it also serves as an entertainer. Because if you entertain parliaments with subsidiarity, they will overlook everything else. So interparliamentary cooperation, COSAC, many different fora should serve for parliaments to engage with each other and learn what others are doing. On the lessons learned, I will just leave it here, and I will raise your attention to point 3. Because it's the aftermath of the recent opinions. How are national parliaments, and this is something for academics to look into if they wish, how will national parliaments, especially in those cases where the threshold was met, how do they monitor what happens next? How do they monitor if their national governments actually are complying with the recent opinions they issued? In the case of EPO, from what I know from the negotiations, the Commission has been changing many things, and some of those things are the ones that national parliaments refer to in their recent opinions. Is this because the recent opinions reflect what the governments think? Or are the governments in the negotiation trying to change what the Commission is proposing because of what national parliaments did? It's an interesting, I don't have a reply myself for this, but it's something that should be referred to. I know that Karin will refer to something that happened this week in Brussels, which was a meeting of like-minded parliaments somehow on how to structure cooperation between parliaments, specifically on subsidiarity. And I will stop by just leaving a personal word of caution, which is we should not, civil servants, members of parliament, national parliaments as such, transform subsidiarity into something which is not meant to be, which is a blocking force of European integration. If you try to engage other parliaments into choosing priorities, and those priorities are chosen because those are the ones that you think will be the ones raising issues to have a blocking minority when it comes to the yellow card, that's the wrong perspective from my point of view. Parliaments should use subsidiarity as much as they can to raise their profile and not to be a blocking force.
Okej, tack så hemskt mycket, Bruno. Då så Karin, är det din tur. Varmt välkommen.
Stort tack för det. Tack för ordet. Tack till alla andra paneldeltagare för intressanta presentationer. Jag inser utmaningen jag står inför att